Morning, everyone. Just a few more minutes. We'll kick it off. Thanks for joining us today. All right. So, super excited to host another West Virginia Outdoor Economy webinar series. My name is Corey Lilly. I'm your host for the series. I'm a manager at the Outdoor Community Development, at the Brad and Lee Smith Outdoor Economic Development Collaborative at WVU, and I work doing outdoor community development. And so I'm super excited to bring this webinar to you. This is our fourth webinar in the series, and we have a lot more coming in 2026. So I appreciate everyone who's joined us this year in the past few webinars, from everyone from Outdoor Recreation Roundtable that we had on the first call, to the League of American Bicyclists and the City of Beckley. We've had some really great speakers and really excited about today's call because everyone always wants to know, how to implement a successful project and how to implement the award that you get to have the most biggest impact on your project. So that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today. But first, I want to let everyone know, if you don't know about the Brad and Elise Smith Outdoor Economic Development Collaborative, our mission is to empower West Virginia communities and partners to advance the state's economy, enhance quality of life through outdoor recreation. So, our purpose and what we are aiming to do is address the population loss. We want to slow and even reverse that population loss, and especially in our young entrepreneurs across the state. We want to create a place that they want to move to. If they value the outdoors and rural living, then West Virginia is the place for you, and we want to create and empower vibrant, thriving communities across the state. So we do that through a couple different programs. We have one of our departments, our talent attraction and retention program. This is where our Ascend West Virginia lives, and our first Ascent. This is our flagship remote worker talent and attraction and retention program, where we incentivize remote workers to stay in the state, and relocate to the states. And then on our outdoor economy, community, and infrastructure side, that's the team that I'm on, and where this program, the webinar series, is delivered through. So in our outdoor economy side of the team, we have things from trail training and education resource center, where we get in the field with you and help you actually work moving dirt, and teaching and volunteers how to best build sustainable and maintain sustainable trails. We have our outdoor business development work that we do. We help local nonprofits through our outdoor community development hub, and we also work with grants and research. And Jesse from our team today is who is presenting. So we are currently building out our 2026 trail training and education calendar. So if you have ideas for webinars, or if you have ideas for workshops, or you would like to see one of these in-person workshops come to your town, please reach out. Please let us know. Please engage with us. We want to be able to deliver this content to the right folks, and get the right type of content to meet your needs. So please let us know if you are interested in some of these trainings, or if there's a particular type of webinar or topic that you'd like to see discussed in 2026. We will certainly love to hear your ideas. We're also having a big launch of our outdoor community gatherings across 2026, and we're having them in multiple locations. So please stay tuned for our schedule. They'll be everywhere from in north central West Virginia down into the New River Gorge and our eastern panhandle, into the Mon Forest and Elkins and in the Greenbrier Valley. They're all across the state. If you have interest in presenting at one of these or tabling at one of these events, please let me know. I'd also like to mention to y'all the West Virginia Outdoor Economy Summit. It's the inaugural Outdoor Economy Summit for West Virginia, where we're bringing together everyone from our outdoor businesses to our nonprofits and conservation partners to tourism partners, getting everyone in the room to celebrate and work together and network for our outdoor economy in West Virginia. I want everyone to be aware that November 30th is the close of our early bird registration. So please, if you are interested in joining the summit and being there with us, this is a chance to get a discounted price. Also, if you are a consultant or a business that would like to sponsor the summit, please reach out to us. We have sponsorship packages that are also in place, and we'd love to partner with you. Following the summit is a day at the Capitol, outdoor recreation day at the Capitol in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. So we have a lot of great things lined up. Please put this on your calendar. Please register. A lot of these links I'll be dropping in the chat after I finish up with my portion of the presentation. So stay tuned. I see Gabby. Yes, I'll be dropping that link for registration to the summit in the chat. No problem. And to stay up to date on all of our communications, the best way to know what's going on with OEDC and the work that we do is through our Outdoor Economy newsletter. So this goes out about every 2 months, and it is filled full of resources and information, as well as the programs and events that we're launching across the state. It's the best way to stay tuned in. Also, our social media channels are other ways, but this is a for sure way for it to land into your inbox. So sign up to this. I'll also drop this link in the chat. But I am super excited to welcome to the webinar series Jesse Cecil, who is on our grants team here at the Brad Lee Smith Outdoor Economic Development Collaborative, and he's got an exciting topic for you on how to make the biggest impact with your award. So I'm going to pass it over to Jesse to start his presentation. Jesse, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Good morning, everybody. As Corey said, I'm Jesse Cecil. I'm the Grants and Research Coordinator with the Brad and Lee Smith Outdoor Economic Development Collaborative. We're going to talk about a subject that is hugely important, also really easy to get down in the weeds about. Hold on just a second. Let me get my screen share going here.
You should have access to it now, Jesse.
Yep. All right, so everybody is always eager to apply for a grant and to get some money to do the impactful work that you're all doing out there in the world. And just want to take a second to tell you all how much I appreciate and we appreciate the work that you do for the communities of West Virginia in whatever area it is you're specializing in. However, if you we like to use the analogy, or I like to use the analogy of the dog that catches the car, or if you're going to pull a tiger's tail, you need to be ready to deal with its teeth. In many cases, getting the award is the easy part. I know we all struggle to get the funding, but once the funding is obtained, then the difficulty of managing it kicks in. And so the goal here is to kind of keep it high level and give you all some tips and some guidance and some tools that you can utilize to get started in this process. Again, I'm going to try to avoid getting too far down in the weeds, but I'm really happy to continue the conversation with anybody that's interested in into getting into the weeds. I love a good rabbit hole, but we don't have enough time for that today. So I do want to stress that good management is your key to credibility, organizational sustainability, and future funding success with the award that you have received, and with additional beyond that. So today we're going to go over some brief introductions. We're already getting started with that. We'll go through some goals and learning objectives. We're going to talk about the pre-award foundations, which are really important to lay down before you even get the award. The key steps that you're going to need to go through post-award, and a number of tools and pitfalls and some examples that you need to keep an eye on as you go through. You will see some recurrent themes that are going to keep popping up slide after slide. That repetition is intentional. There are really key tenets that you need to keep in mind always. So if you feel that it's repetitive, then that's your key to pay attention to those particular aspects. At the end, we'll hopefully have some time for Q&A, and then following the webinar, we will send out bundle of resources. I think there are 9 currently. Some of the ones we'll talk about and others that will be available for you to use as tools or to reference as you continue this work. And again, I'm happy to continue the conversation with folks that would like more information on how to utilize some of the tools and resources or have specific detailed kind of questions. So again, I'm Jesse Cecil. I've had 13 years of ops and financial management experience. At Brad and Elise Smith, I've been here since November at the OEDC, last November at the OEDC. I worked for 7 years at the West Virginia Land Trust, running operations for them. My job here at the OEDC spans pre-award, post-award, and programmatic and outward-facing content like this. So I'm both developing and applying for grants and proposals, and then managing them after they come through. Our current portfolio of awards that we're managing includes, or that we're actively have applications in, our ARC, AML or AMLR, Recreation Trails Program, HUD, CPF, Community Project Funding earmarks. We also have large foundation grants from Benedum, Arcane Mellon, and various smaller but just as important foundations throughout the state. So real quickly, I wanted to kind of get a read on who I'm talking to and what your experience is. So I think we have a Q&A that we can pop up. But basically, I'd like you to let me know what your experience is with managing grants. And this is a click all that apply. If you've participated in reporting, if you've managed a foundation grant, or if you've managed a federal grant. So if you can take a second and answer that in the polls and quizzes, it should have popped up in front of you. I'll give you a couple minutes to respond. Is that working?
I'm going to end it if anyone has a last minute entry they'd like to do. Okay. So 13 out of 15 participants have participated in reporting. 7 out of 15 folks have participated in managing a foundation grant, and 7 out of 15 folks have managed a federal grant. So about
Nice.
yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey. So this other question that's up here is not, it's somewhat of a rhetorical question. The point is for me to say that you should never really be that comfortable with reporting. The importance and severity of this responsibility to the success of your project and your organization cannot be understated. So don't get too comfortable. Always take it with the gravity that it deserves. And so do not ever, I think it's my suggestion for you never to be too comfortable with the reporting responsibilities. Always double check, triple check. So our learning objectives here, we're going to talk about when you should identify your compliance requirements and where to find those. We're going to discuss basic internal systems that you should set up to track and manage your funds. And we are going to discuss documentation, reporting, and communication best practices. And then we'll discuss some tips and pitfalls to wrap up, which will kind of be a refresher or a reminder. So foundations for success. Successful post-award administration starts with pre-award. If you don't think about the post-award during the development of your proposal, you are going to be doing some catch-up, and there may be some things that it's going to be too late to fix. So begin with the end in mind. As you're developing a budget, it should be realistic, based on a detailed plan, and include cost estimates from a subject matter expert. You're developing a budget, be thinking about how you're going to implement the budget, how you're going to be spending the money, and build that mindset into the budget itself. Your final budget that you submit to the funder, you should have a version of it that is annotated. Lots of those final budgets, the templates that are required by funders for ARC, for example, they don't have the level of detail that you can use to deconstruct or reverse engineer everything that went into those line item totals. So you need to have a more detailed budget that has annotations so that you can understand what went into those totals and you can deconstruct them and you can report on them as needed. We will have a budget template that we can offer or that we'll be sending out in the resources packet. And you can kind of start there and customize your own um, according to your own needs. Um, when you're talking about match, when you're thinking about, when you're getting match contributions, you need to be thinking about how these are structured, how you're going to document them, and how you track them. You are having a community partner that says they're going to provide a number of hours in volunteer service, then you need to make sure that there's a system and structure in place whereby those hours are tracked, they're submitted to you, and they are reportable because match is you're required to report on match just as you're required to report on direct spend. So be thinking about trackability with your match as well as your direct expenses. So trackability includes things like um, coding for expenses, making sure that funding that you have for you've allocated for an expense that can actually be allocated as such in your tracking systems, and we'll talk about that a bit more. Personnel time, if you're charging personnel time, whether it be percentage of time or hours, that needs to be, you need to be able to document that. So if you currently, as many small nonprofits around the state, I imagine, don't, if you don't have personnel time tracking systems in place, then that is something that you're going to need to develop and back up. You're not going to be able to invoice something that you don't have documentation for. So um, also, many grants have performance measures and metrics that you'll need to track. How many attendees did you have? How many um, organizations were represented by your attendees? What's the geographic service area? Those kinds of things. So make sure that you have systems in place to capture those metrics and measures so that you can report on them appropriately, because that is just as much a responsibility as the expenses um, and deliverables. So know your funder. Private, foundation, state, federal, they all have different responsibilities, different levels of um, reporting requirements, and different cadence for reports. So make sure that you are aware of those going into a process. Sometimes if you have monthly or quarterly reporting, um, the burden is more intense. So take that into account as you're figuring out if you have the capacity to take on an award. Another really essential, maybe the most essential foundation for grant management success is relationships and roles. So just like everything, relationships are hugely important. You should build those relationships early during the process of your um, project development and proposal. You'll be talking to your partners on the project. You should also be talking to your funder representatives. Make sure that you communicate expectations with your partners about reporting and making sure that you're going to be able to get the information that you need back and the cadence that is appropriate to the grant requirements of the funder. I think it's really important to emphasize that funder representatives are not just your compliance officers. Okay, they are not cops that are trying to bust you. You have already been awarded the funding at the point that post award, when you're trying to spend down the money. They are there to make sure that you are spending down the money appropriately, that you're able to implement the project. They are your partner. They are not cops. So treat them with respect. They're one of your most valuable assets in being able to implement, especially really complex federal grants. So again, with partners, project partners, communicate your expectations. Yes, Ken, these slides will be available after the fact. Another really important relationship and role structure to think about is your internal systems. It might go without saying, but it shouldn't go without saying. If you have a grant and finance manager, it's hugely important that you communicate with them the structure of the grant and the budget, and you're able to have a back and forth with them, because they are another link in the chain. They're one more step removed from project implementation, most likely. At WVU, they are 2 or 3 steps removed from program staff. So while it's great to have additional support structure and not have to do it all yourself, and I imagine, in many nonprofits around the state, we are all doing it by, you are all doing it by yourself or with a couple of folks. But if you have an additional link in the chain, make sure that you have regular communication with that person, because they're the ones that are going to be allocating or misallocating your expenses. And so making sure that they understand the programs and what the expenses thereof is hugely important. Likewise, your program staff, they need to understand their budgets, what money they have to spend and how that's allocated according to your budget structure. One thing that can help you communicate roles and expectations is a very simple work plan, a RACI chart. So this is an example of a RACI work plan and timeline that I developed for a grant proposal. But this is we'll provide an empty template of this RACI work plan so that you can use it for your projects. RACI is it determines who is responsible, who is accountable, who is consulted, and who is informed on a project. So it's really important to determine who's doing what. We have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. There can be overlap, there can be confusion, and there can be stagnation. So it's really important to define that ahead of time as much as possible and make sure that that's reinforced throughout the process. So post-award steps in the process. Step 1 is, review all of your award documents. You need to carefully read all of the grant award notice, all of the requirements that they might send to you at that point. Watch for hidden compliance requirements or ones that are tacked on that maybe weren't in the last. Maybe you had several grants from this and they changed some guidelines. One that had popped up, and this was in a proposal, but it's an applicable example. The ARC Power program has a stipulation in the appendix of that for construction projects. The applicant should also be the landowner of the property. And in many cases, as we're working to develop recreation infrastructure or trails projects, that is not the case. The applicant is not the landowner. And so navigating that kind of requirement, knowing that kind of requirement is in there, adds an additional layer of complexity both to the proposal process and then for managing the grant afterwards. So if the applicant is the landowner, but they're not going to be the one that's really managing and implementing the project, then you have another link in the chain that you have to manage. So that's just one example. The notice of funding application, the NOSA and NOFOs, they have a lot of information in them. Do not skip over that. Read them all with great detail. And likewise, when you get the notice of the award notice, it will usually come with a grant guide that outlines your match and reporting and eligible cost requirements and guidelines, your procurement requirements, your indirect cost rules, and your document retention period. There are some really important things that you need to make sure that you understand for each grant because they're not always the same. So rebudgeting authority is if you have the ability to shift money between categories when it needs change. So say you budgeted a certain amount, $10,000 for travel, and you find out that you're only going to need 8,500, or but you can use that 2,500 for another programmatic cost. You have the ability in most cases to shift up to 10% between line items with an active award, but that is not a blanket rule across all awards. It is different for every funder. So make sure that you understand what your rebudgeting authority is, who has that process for reallocating those funds if necessary. Make sure you're aware of your performance period. This is the window of time when project activities and spending are allowed under a grant. The notice of award is not a notice to proceed. Okay? It is not, when you get a notice of award, that does not mean you can start spending money and expect that it will get reimbursed. This is hugely important. There is a period of time between the notice of award and your grant agreement and you are not allowed to spend money.
Cut out. Hang on a second. Sorry about this technical difficulty.
All right, can you hear me now? Corey?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Bluetooth battery was killed on the plane last night, I'm afraid. All right, another thing is your document retention period. So with many federal grants, you have a document retention period whereby after the project, you still have to retain all of those documentations for audit purposes. So it's usually 3 to 5 years post closeout. And in many cases, for AML, for example, you have to continue your active reporting, your annual reports for 5 years after project closeout. That's not just document retention, it's active reporting. All right, so we mentioned before the this gap in between award notice and signed agreement. So let's dive into that a little more deeply. That award notice is essentially a congratulations, you've been chosen message. It does not mean that you can spend this money yet. So review your terms and conditions. Many funders include additional requirements about insurance or procurement policies and special certifications that are required. So make sure that you're aware of those and review all the documentation they provide you. Check any special terms about your reporting, your match, your compliance. This is often also a period of negotiation. It's not always allowed, but if allowed, some of the things that you can do is modify or adjust or clarify your budget, your timeline, and your allowable costs. Generally, funders understand that it may have been a year or more since you have applied for this funding. Conditions on the ground have changed or may have changed. And so if you have an opportunity to adjust your budget and make it more dialed in for the project at this point in its project development, make sure that you take advantage of that opportunity. Dial it in, review everything. If it's been a while since you looked at your budget, when you get that notice of award, dive back in, make sure that everything you said a year ago still lines up. And if it doesn't, this is your opportunity to revise it. Now with HUD, the HUD earmarks, Housing and Urban Development, Community Project Funding, there's an extensive period of essentially, because it was awarded during an earmark, you reapply for the grant. You've already been awarded it, but you're still submitting a project description. You're still submitting a revised budget, and that gives you the opportunity to dial things in. Do not pass up an opportunity to make sure that your project is closer to a situation on the ground than it was. This is also the point where you're going to be getting internal approvals from your legal and finance team, your governing board if required, or likewise any sub-awardees or sub-recipients that you have lined up in the project. If it's a large project, there may be additional documentation required from them. This is an incredibly important period of time. It's also can be frustrating because you've gotten the notice of award, you're ready to spin down. It might be the beginning of construction season and you're ready to get out there and move some soil. Don't miss this step. If it takes 6 months, if it takes 8 months, that's what it takes. This is part of the process. It's hugely important. The end of this process gets you your grant agreement, and your grant agreement is your license to spend. That's what we all want. So when you have the grant agreement, funds are officially obligated, and the performance period begins on the date of execution of your grant agreement. Again, I think the key takeaway here is do not make the mistake that your award notice is money in the bank. If you spend money before you've gotten your grant agreement, it is not reimbursable. All right, let's talk about systems. So also during that gap between notice and grant award, this is your time to be thinking about systems. In fact, you should be thinking about systems now, even if you haven't applied for the project. Systems are hugely important for implementing any kind of larger grant funding project. So you need to be making sure that your project team structure and roles and expectations for communication and collaboration are clear. You need to create budget codes and or accounts if you're using QuickBooks, create spending guides. We have created a document called an allocation tree, which provides staff with a breakdown of grant-funded expenses and activities in each category for easy reference. It also links the grant budget category with the expense category in your accounting system, ideally. The way that grant budgets are laid out in categories is pretty intuitive. There's supplies, materials, travel, contracts, other direct expenses, personnel, fringe, things like that. However, those categories are not necessarily mirrored in your accounting system. In fact, they probably are not, which adds additional layers of complication. And so understanding the mapping of how this grant funded expense lines up with your expense codes that you're going to have to enter when you're putting in your credit card receipts, for example, that your program staff is going to be held accountable for categorizing is really important. So you need to have a roadmap, essentially, and this allocation tree is one way to do that. We'll be providing a template for that as well. In my next slide, we can kind of take a look at what one of those looks like. Do not wait until your first expense is incurred. Systems should be in place first. No matter how good your accounting system is, it's important to have what's called a shadow ledger or a spreadsheet that you're tracking in addition to the official financial systems of your organization. So if you're having to wait on a contract CPA to send you back financials every month to be able to figure out where you are on your grant spend down, that's not sustainable, and really it's not operationally effective at all. So make sure that you are tracking your expenses, that you know where you are. And that usually involves having a shadow system of tracking financials elsewhere other than your official accounting system. I think it's also really important to have a calendar of key dates with reminders about reports, potential auditing windows, draws and draw requests. Different methods that you can utilize for this are, Microsoft Planner, which is a built-in app in the 365. It's not my favorite. You can use Outlook tasks or to-dos. We are using a system called Airtable, which is a wonderful system, requires a little more setup, but there's some templates for all of the types of tasks that you would be using, and there are free packages available for that software. If you have any additional questions or would like to talk about Airtable a bit more, we're hugely supportive of that system, and we'd be happy to schedule time with you to discuss how you can implement that in your organization and find the benefit that we have been able to find and are working to develop now. Lastly, align your reporting deadlines and your regular staff meetings. So make sure that if you've got a reporting deadline at the end of the month, that you have a meeting at the beginning with all of your program staff and you run through everything that's required. It's often 3 or 4 months in between reporting intervals. 3 or 4 months is a world. It's an eon. You can forget everything in between. So make sure that you have a little refresher with your staff. Make sure that you're sending out notifications, emails with consistent, repeatable guidance so that people can be reminded and understand what it is that they're responsible for. All right, so this is, I apologize if it's a little small on your screen. This is an example of an allocation tree. At the surface, it looks like the same kind of budget that you would submit to the grant funder, and that's by design. So what you have here is the program area or task. This is for our ARC Power Core grant that funds actually this work that we're doing right here. And so what you see is the budget categories and then the individual grant funded activities and how much money is allocated for each activity. You have the funding string. This is the internal number system designation that identifies that grant fund in WVU's systems, and the grant expense type coding that WVU uses in their internal systems. WVU being a very large organization with a vast array of different types of spending, they have categories that are not as intuitive as each unit would like. So it's really important to understand the mapping of what goes to what, essentially. We'll provide a template for that document as well, and I'm happy to discuss how to use that and implement that further into your organization. This is this is one of my favorite slides, my favorite picture anyway. I feel like this is me 90% of the time. If you have not explored 2CFR 200, this is the uniform guidance for all grant funding, all federal grant funding. If you have not reviewed that yet, once you begin, you will understand this picture. It is a vast array of requirements and guidance that is internally referenced using numbers and linked all on different pages. It is hugely difficult to find a simple answer to one question about one particular area. So there's a lot of connecting the dots and jumping back and forth. Procurement requirements are rolled into 2CFR 200. They're hugely important. We have a summary document that breaks down the essential requirements of 2CFR 200 for procurement, and that is in the resource documents that we'll be providing you as well. It's really important to understand that there are thresholds for different kinds of procurement requirements. Sub $10,000 are micro purchases. They do not require competitive bids. Sub 250,000 are small purchases. They require a reasonable amount of competitive bids, but not closed or sealed bids. You can just get quotes from folks and choose the one that most meets the requirements. Over 250,000 is your formal procurement process, and this requires RFPs. In West Virginia, if you have to use Chapter 5G in the West Virginia Code, then it would be an RFQ process. There's a lot that goes into each of those, and we could spend the rest of our time on that. I prefer not to. If you'd like to discuss further, reach out to us so we can discuss. Essentially, Code 5G is the state procurements for architectural and engineering. And if you're contracting a trail designer or a trail construction firm, in most cases, you're going to have to work with an engineering firm who will then subcontract the trail design and construction firm. So understanding when you have to engage 5G is really important. I will give you a little hint that I use for 2CFR 200 is first I ask ChatGPT what 2CFR 200 says about insert topic here. And then I use the responsive ChatGPT to go to the 2CFR 200 page where it has that answer, and I confirm that information there. But the initial search, it's usually beneficial to use an AI engine to come up with an initial answer that can guide your that can direct your inquiry a bit more closely. In terms of audit readiness, this is a huge aspect of risk management. You need to make sure that you keep your files organized in a system that prevents scramble at reporting deadlines. So what we recommend is a template structure in a audit ready binder. The next slide goes over that structure really quickly, but that structure in a Word document is one of the resources that we'll be providing to you as well. Another essential aspect of risk management is to address your conflicts of interest early. If you have a board member, for example, that has an interest in a trail construction firm, or a family member that has an interest in a construction firm, or any number of complex or not complex conflict of interest, or what could be perceived as a conflict of interest, because we need to understand and remember that it is not so much the actual conflict of interest, because most people can and will avoid those, but the perceived conflict of interest that is the problem. And so you want to make sure that you have conflict of interest representation documents from all of your board members updated in the case that you get awarded the large federal grant. All right, so this is your grant binder template structure. Basically, you're going to set up root folders for your award documents, your budget and financials, your procurement, programmatic documentation. personnel, reporting, compliance, and audit, and closeout. All of the types of documents in each of those folders are outlined here. Yes, there are folders and categories that you're not going to use for every award. However, having a repeatable structure that everybody understands and is laid out according to a template like this makes it so that anybody, any program staff, any auditor can go into your folders and pull the files that they need. They know where the source of truth is. They can search it out and find this in your internal filing structure. This is easier said than done, especially if you have a large filing structure that's accessible by everybody and their mother, and you're trying to keep a tight rein on things. But it's really important for everybody to understand where to go to find the approved budget, for example, where to find the initial application so you can find out what was promised, where to read your grant guide, where the timesheets and effort certifications are that back up your request for funding. Those are just some examples. There's a lot of it, but I would encourage everybody to set up your grant folder structure in a similar way. All right, let's talk about spending and cash flow. You get some freedom to spend your cash, but the way that flows varies from grant to grant. So some of these awards are reimbursement based. Many of them are reimbursement based. Recreation Trails Program, for example. Others are direct pay. So you would upload your invoices into a portal, and then there'll be an escrow account that was set up, and the funder will release funds into that account. I think it's an escrow. That might not be the right term. There's an interim account set up so that money will flow from the funder into that account, and then that account is what pays the invoices. So you're not actually submitting paid invoices to the portal. You're submitting invoices to be paid, and then your fiscal manager will take care of that. And some grants, if you're lucky or unlucky enough, they'll just cut you a check, but then that's the rope that you can hang yourself. So you need to really make sure, even if you just get a direct payment, that all your systems are in place so that you can make sure that everything is allocated appropriately and is not going to come back to bite you. I actually prefer a portal-based direct pay or reimbursement model because of that, because there are checks and balances all along the way. And if there's going to be something that is not allowable, it'll get caught before it gets paid. And then you still have a knot to untie, but it's a much easier knot. So in the instance where you have a reimbursement grant, you need to understand the requirement of having cash reserves in order to implement that project successfully. And plan ahead so that you have the cash flow so the project doesn't stall. If you only have enough funding in the bank for 1 month's worth of invoices, and then you're waiting a month to 90 days to get reimbursed before you can go on to the next month, you're going to have some displeased contractors, and you're going to have a much stalled project. So make sure that you have considered that if it's a reimbursement grant. Also, it's a possibility that you may want to explore a loan or a line of credit in order to front probably 20% of the project costs so that you can have a revolving door of funding so that you can successfully implement your project. Regardless of how, whether it's reimbursement, direct pay, make sure that you're submitting your invoices promptly and that you're communicating effectively. As with many federal programs, you get to have lots of fun with portals. Portals can be great. There's a lot of development spent on making them useful tools for grant administrators and funders and awardees. They can also be difficult. They have bugs just like everything. So bouncing back to your relationship with your funder representative, they're the first person that you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm trying to upload this draw request and it's not coming through. What's the deal? Or I certified my report, but something was wrong. I need to uncertify it and then correct that. So making sure that you have this open channel of communication with all parties involved with your reporting and draw process is hugely important because portals can be tricky. Yes, an ARC just changed portals, middle of the stream. Yeah, right in the middle of a government shutdown too, which was really fantastic. I actually had made my peace with ArcNet. So I'm sad to see it go. I have not yet delved into pathways, but that's on my list for this week. So this slide may be updated for the next time I deliver this presentation based on how pathways transition goes. All right, so tracking systems. We've talked about the importance of trackability in all things, but I just want to reiterate the importance of this. For ARC, you have performance measures in addition to your expenses, your time, your travel and mileage, obviously things that you need to track because you want the money back from those. You have metrics for your outputs and outcomes. So I always stumble on this. I think a really good way to think about it is outputs are the numbers served. That's the raw number of attendees. That's the raw number of counties that you have worked in. Outcomes speak to the impact or the change from your programmatic your programmatic activities. So did people gain knowledge? Was there there are different measurement activities that you can build into your programmatic grant funded activities. I hate to use activities twice, sorry. But it's important to understand, okay, this many people attended and this many people were improved. And so one way that you can do that is through post-award surveys or questions during during a webinar or workshop, or have a feedback survey afterwards. And so what's important to remember is output, raw numbers, outcome, impact. And you're going to be required to report on anything that you assert is going to be the output and outcome of your program. So to make sure that you're building in those measurement activities into your plans. You also need to build reporting as just a basic organizational tenet into your team culture. This is not a year-end scramble, a reporting period scramble. Reporting is not in addition to the work of your grant-funded program. Reporting is essential to the work. It is your evidence of project status or success. So it is not just the responsibility of the grant manager. It's not the responsibility of the finance team. It is everybody's responsibility. It's hugely important. And understanding that that it is part and parcel to the work, not extra work, I think is really helpful in getting your project team and your program staff on board with the roles and responsibilities that they have in implementation and reporting. Using consistent templates is also really important. So for everything that you have to report on or track, make sure that there's a consistent template that captures and provide and rolls up the information that you need, and that your staff all know how to utilize those. We at OEDC and as part of the core program, we'll be launching a resource library that will include not just the resources that you're going to be getting today or after this webinar, but an enormous amount of other resources spanning project development and trail building and grants and research and the whole gamut of information that you might want to dive a little more deeply into, things that we touch on in our webinars and workshops. And so that is coming later this year. We're in the process of building that out, and we're looking forward to launching that as a benefit for communities across the state. I think that I've covered this, but again, I said if I'm repeating it, it's hugely important. Documentation is everything. Documentation eases the way for reporting. It protects you during audits. It enables progress monitoring. Save everything. Document it. If you don't document it, it didn't exist. Convert emails to PDFs and stash them in the appropriate folder if you have a conversation that's important. If you have a question that goes to your grant representative that determines how you're going to report or implement an activity, save that email, stash it in the grant file. It's hugely important to back up and validate any decisions that you've made or actions that you've taken in the case of an audit. What you don't want is asking a question, going through the trouble of figuring out the answer, And then a year later, a lot of time has passed and you don't actually remember, and you have to recreate the entire process just to figure out what you already figured out once. So make sure you document it. Make sure you stash the answer or the solution somewhere that you know where you can find it, and that it can be a resource to you in the case of an audit. Again, this digital or physical grant binder structure that we've provided is an aid for that. Make sure that, just as a rule of thumb, expenses should be reasonable, allocable, and allowable. So that means, is this expense necessary? Is it tied to the project? And is it allowed by the rules? These things should be determined before you even send in your proposal. They should be part of the pre-proposal development and budget process. But make sure that that kind of question is also asked as you're charging expenses throughout the implementation project. So some systems and tools that can help you depending on your organization size and budget. Obviously, the go-to, I think the baseline is spreadsheet and Excel. Systems of linked spreadsheets through SharePoint are hugely beneficial. Even small organizations, if you have somebody that's well versed in Excel, especially if you have SharePoint, that can solve a lot of your issues. Larger orgs may benefit from other apps that integrate HR and finance, in addition to programmatic spin down. So QuickBooks, I have often wished that I just had a really simple QuickBooks access to QuickBooks so that I could set up accounts according to different grants. That's not really a viable solution given the size of our organization and the grants that we manage and all the other things at play. But for many of you, if you already have QuickBooks, it's a simple matter of setting up accounts and classes and sub accounts to make sure that you have everything and you can track it accordingly. There are specific grant management apps that you can subscribe to. They have an enormous amount of functionality. They're also expensive. However, grant management is an allowable expense in grant funds. So if you're budgeting, if you're in the budgeting and project development process and you feel that you need a grant management app, put it in the grant. Make sure that you have funding for it and then get it done. Again, we use Airtable, and there are a lot of Airtable templates available for building out these kinds of processes, and be happy to discuss that with you further. Quickly run through the tips and common pitfalls. Start a grant binder. Go through your grant funder guidance with a fine-tooth comb, bookmark it, highlight it, however you do it, whether it's digitally or I like to print them out and tab them and highlight them and have them as a quick reference. But I just like the tactile nature of printed materials. But do what works for you, but make sure that you understand what is in your funder guidance and you know where to find the answers. Align your reports and staff meetings. Beware of cost overruns. This is huge. Make sure that you allow enough funding in the budget. You have high enough ceilings based on realistic cost opinions, because it is better to have extra money and then have to come back to the funder and say, hey, we have money left over. We would like to do this additional thing with the funding, than to go back to them and say, we actually didn't have enough money to implement the project that was described. We need more money. So budget, have some flexible costs and built in so that you don't run the risk of cost overruns at the end. Make sure that you don't have any expenses outside the grant period, either before or after the period of performance. Make sure that you're documenting all of your match every time you have a reporting deadline. Make sure that you're communicating with your project partners and subawardees, and that you're getting all the documentation that you need from them in order to fulfill your reporting requirements. Avoid a finance-only mindset about reporting. Everybody, we're all in this together, all the program staff, all the administration staff. Everybody is responsible for reporting, and everybody should understand the severity of the consequences should it be mismanaged. So make sure that everybody is on board and everybody understands that their contributions are essential. Do not wait until your deadline is looming to begin your reporting process. Small mistakes can jeopardize your credibility and possibility of future funding. Some things that you might need to take into consideration. You might have construction delays based on supply chain or other concerns, government shutdowns, for example. Your program activity may change because it was situation on the ground changes as your project develops. So you may have to go back and have a change of scope or a discussion with your funder about how you can make sure that your program meets the needs and the projected impact that you want. Communicating with your funder is hugely important. And a note here from Rich Edwards, specifically about construction projects, is to ensure that your compliance requirements for natural and cultural resource protection are supportable by the project or client budget. Make sure that you have enough money in your budget to fulfill the compliance requirements for natural and cultural resource protection. All of your NEPA clearances cost an immense amount of money. Make sure that you have that budget. I'm going to jump through this slide because we're running short on time. Resources that you're going to get are, I'm sorry, this is not been updated. This is from a previous presentation, but you're going to get a grant administration checklist. You're going to get the grant binder template structure, the work plan timeline template, grant budget template. There'll be the 2 CFR 200 summary document, and a reminder that we have the OEDC resource library launching soon. Have a couple more questions or comments, but that concludes the formal portion of my presentation.
Jesse, thanks so much. There's so much information in that. And grants, can be incredibly complicated. So some of the systems that you lined out are really valuable assets. I know especially with some growing nonprofits that are developing systems, it's not always needed to recreate the wheel. So having some of these examples that you shared was really insightful. Thanks so much. So now is a good time. We have 2 minutes here. So to honor everyone's hour for the webinar, but you can come off, you can turn on your video and ask any questions. We'll get to a couple of them, and it can extend past noon, but just want to be sure that everyone knows that we will be following up with an email, that you'll receive these resources, and then this webinar is also recorded so you can share it to colleagues if you feel like it's valuable. But thanks so much for your time on the webinar today, and we really look forward to having you on future webinars in 2026. We'll be rolling out our schedule and topics very soon. But now is a good time for questions to come off screen. Jesse, I have a question.
Sure.
And if no one else does, what is a common pitfall that in a trail project that many people face once they're awarded a grant? Like what are some of those common challenges? Because outdoor infrastructure projects can be really complicated and they're pretty nuanced. So what are some of those common pitfalls that you might see that you might let folks know about before they dive into the project, specifically a trail project?
Yeah, so I think probably the most important is a cost overrun, right? The worst thing that can possibly happen to you is you go to implement a trail project and you run out of money. So I actually had a note in here to mention this earlier, and I didn't get a chance to touch on it. In the foundations portion, when you're developing your project plan, it's important to put in somewhat flexible measures and expectations. So if you're going to propose to build 25 miles of trail, don't say 25 miles of trail. Say up to 25 miles of trail, say 20 to 25 miles of trail. Okay, so that gives you a window where you're not failing to meet what you've proposed. And if you do have additional costs that you didn't anticipate and you run short of funding and you're 5 miles short of that threshold, if you said 20 to 25, you're still accomplishing what you've put forward on the grant. If you say 25 and you've only gotten 20, then you're in a position where you're going to have to ask for extra money, or you're not going to be able to meet the threshold that you said that you proposed. So some creative planning on the front end can really help you with that. Things happen. seeking out additional funding is not the worst, but there are some steps that you can take early on in the process to mitigate the likelihood of that being a detrimental impact to your project. So I'd say that's probably the biggest one that I can rattle off to you off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
that's great because, I feel like trail projects, you don't know what you're going to find when you're digging out in the dirt or what you'll come across, or if there's a really technical section that all of a sudden your trail costs of building that trail tread for the next mile jumps up in cost because of the challenges that the terrain offers. So having that window is really valuable. Any other questions from the group? Jasper,
Yeah,
Shelley,
I have a
Madison?
quick question, if you have time here.
Go for
Sure.
it, Tyler.
Jesse, when it comes to dealing with money that was held back for contingency that ends up not being used for contingency during a project, what's the best way that you've encountered to be able to plan for that money and be able to have that as an allowable expense? Because oftentimes, I mean, there's been several projects we've encountered where we've saved the money back, obviously, which is the best practice because we've certainly encountered situations where we've had to dip into that contingency funds. But oftentimes here we are at the end of a project and we're left over with sometimes a fair amount of contingency funds that didn't need to be used. And of
Right.
course, we don't want to have to give those back if we don't have to. So, but then we often are struggling or scrambling to figure out, okay, well, we've got some things, but how do we present that in a acceptable manner to be able to be used? Oftentimes it may align with this scope, but sometimes it might extend slightly beyond the original scope. I was just curious if you had any thoughts or recommendations as to how to successfully manage that.
Right. So if you recall, I discussed rebudgeting authority earlier. So that means your ability to switch a certain amount of funding in between budget categories, in between budget line items. So for example, from contingency to travel, or from travel to tools, or whatever. So as you're developing your project, I will point out that a 10% contingency is a really robust contingency. So you're probably not going to have that much, but you might, depending on the size of the grant. And if you have 10% rebudgeting authority, then you actually have a window of opportunity to be able to shift that from contingency to something else if you have something in your back pocket. So as you're developing your project, as you're putting together your budget, you have an initial wish list, a grab bag of things that are essential for the project. You also have some things that you would like to do, and if you run afoul of the ceiling of the funder, then those are the things that get trimmed out. But continue to build those out, keep those in your back pocket, describe those activities, and if you have 10% left over in your contingency, then you have a ready-made package of stuff that you can go back to your funder and say, look, these are value adds. These are things that we initially planned and did not fit into the budget, and we'd like to be able to shift that so that we can expand the project scope slightly to incorporate these value add activities.
Just a quick follow on, you mentioned like the rebudgeting authority. I mean, is there a way is that typically outlined or defined in the whatever grant programs documentation, or is that something that you build in or request, or how do you establish that, I guess?
Rebudgeting authority should be an essential guideline, and if it's not explicitly stated, then you should ask. But it should be in your notice of award, your grant agreement, definitely your grant agreement. But make sure that you understand that, because it does change. 10% is a rule of thumb. It's by no means something that you should depend on without confirmation. So know that ability exists, but confirm the avenues that you have to go through and the ceiling of the allowable shifts.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks.
Tyler, I'll just add to, I put it in the chat, you can sometimes do add alts as well as part of it and include that. So that way you've accounted for it, as Jesse alluded to, but it only comes into play if you have the funding available.
That would be, I guess, similar to the terminology of a deductive alternate. Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Same term.
Okay. And so just to clarify on that, is that something, so you add in an add alt or a deductive alternative somewhere in the beginning in the initial budget. I suppose then you could choose at the beginning of the project or upon bid to reserve that potentially, and say we're not gonna proceed with the plan to use that, but in the end, if we encounter some contingency funds, this would be a viable place to put that, or how would you proceed with that?
Yeah, so we're one of the projects that we're using that approach on right now is basically you get the whole because once you put out the bid documents for bids, to go back and redo that is cumbersome, right? And
Yeah.
so you can get the bids back, and let's say you budgeted $3 million, and you put add alts in there, and with the add alts it comes in at 3.2. I'm just using that as an example, and you can still bid it under that, use that contract if you were to come up with more money. Right. And that can be through cost savings. That could be through, additional fundraising. It could be a match grant. It could be some other sources as well. And so that's how I would at least talk with the program officer to see if that is a viable strategy. Some might not allow it, but the one that we're working on right now, they will allow it. So we basically said, we think this is what we need to include that we believe it's going to come in at. But if we have cost savings throughout the project, can we go ahead? And that way it's already been competitively bidded. It checks all the boxes, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Tyler?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great
Somebody just posted a question in the chat regarding rebudgeting authority, or a comment, I suppose. Match for when it comes to
Jasper, I actually don't have a super clear answer for you, but in terms of what you can sub in for volunteer hours, if you can aggregate and document like and equal volunteer hours with some other activity, then I think that's a discussion that you can have. I don't think rebudgeting authority applies because that's a bit of a different guideline, different rule. So it's a good question. My suggestion, if you think that your volunteer hours are going to come up short or you're not sure, then make sure that you think that you can get far more than you need. I'm not saying say that you're going to do more than you think you can get, but I'm saying if you need 800 volunteer hours, be pretty confident that you can get 1,000. Make sure that you can get more than you need because you don't want to come up short on your match. I can look into that and try to get some more information for you though, Jasper.
Well, thank you so much, Jesse, for sharing your expertise today. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for being on the call and lending your time to us today. We hope that it was valuable for you. And again, if you have any topics that you'd like to see in the 2026 webinar series, please let us know. We are building that calendar out right now. But in the meantime, sign up to our Send newsletter. We'll be sending that out, and it'll have updated schedules for the upcoming year. And all of these links that are in this chat, please save them in your webinar browser or your browser right now, because after the webinar concludes, you won't have access to them. However, we will be following up with an email with the links that Jesse has to offer and resources, as well as a couple others. So we really appreciate you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Good luck on all your projects.
Thank you.